good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I want to start by thanking Senator Graham for his leadership on this issue, for his willingness to bring it to the forefront and really find this great bipartisan support for such an important bill. I want to thank our Congresswoman Bustos for her leadership, along with Representative Griffith. But thank you so much for leading this in the House and making sure we have champions on both sides of the chamber. I also want to recognize Senator Durbin and Representative Jayapal, who aren't here, for their leadership. It makes a huge difference to have the span of both the House and Senate on this bill from the start, and that will make a great difference in our ability to pass it this Congress. I also want to recognize and really express my deep gratitude to Gretchen Carlson. Being able to come forward with your story so powerfully, so in such an inspiring way, it's allowed us to rally around your story, because your story represents millions of stories, millions of men and women who have been harassed, who had to sign non-disclosure agreements, and who had to have these forced arbitration clauses. So your story just brings to light why we are here and what we are fighting for in a very profound way. Too often, survivors of sexual assault or harassment in the workplace come forward, but they are then told that they are legally forbidden to sue their employer because their employment contracts include these forced arbitration clauses. Instead of being allowed to have their day in court, these survivors are pushed to a system designed by the same corporation they are actually challenging, blocked from seeking key information that they would need to prove their case, and left in the hands of extrajudicial arbitrators. These arbitrators are trained to simplify, reduce, and minimize these kinds of cases. They're typically selected by the employer, who understands what their view of these cases are in advance, and their employers are not trained as lawyers to know how these cases should be done. The arbitration not only allows the corporations to hide sexual harassment and assault cases in this secret, very secretive, and often biased process, but it also shields those who have committed serious misconduct from the public eye and from other employees. Because the results of arbitration are secret and binding, there's no chance for appeal, and repeat offenders are not held accountable because other victims don't necessarily know about previous victims. Estimates suggest that more than 60 million Americans are subject to these arbitration clauses, and many don't even know it because the clauses can be buried in fine print in documents they may never read. Forced arbitration clauses are especially common in female-dominated industries. The ACLU has reported that 57.6% of female workers are subject to this practice. It's also especially prevalent in low-wage fields and industries with a disproportionately high number of women of color. These clauses leave these women who cannot afford to challenge their employers or the status quo without any recourse. But this affects women in every industry. A 2018 analysis of sexual harassment claims made on Wall Street found that in 30 years, just 17 women won their claims before Wall Street's oversight body. Most cases are dismissed or denied. Across the board, employees are less likely to win arbitration than they are in court. And even when they do win, they typically receive much lower monetary rewards. Survivors deserve a real chance at justice. Our legislation, the Ending Forced Arbitration and Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act, would provide that. This bipartisan, bicameral bill would amend the Federal Arbitration Act to void all forced arbitration provisions for sexual assault and harassment survivors. Removing those provisions would give survivors their day in court. It will allow them to discuss their cases publicly, to tell their coworkers, to tell their families, to tell their communities, and will end the days of institutional protection for harassers. I hope that all of our colleagues will join in pushing this critical reform. Now I'd like to introduce Senator Lindsey Graham, who really took this issue at the forefront and brought it to fruition, for which I'm extremely grateful.
Well, let me just say, a couple of years ago we were here doing this, right?
Yeah, 2017.
So I believe the issue has gotten stronger in terms of our membership understanding what you're trying to do, Senator Gillibrand and Cheri, what you're trying to do. The best way to fix a problem is to acknowledge it, to have transparency, look into the heart of the beast, bring it to the light of day, have a process where everybody can be heard, those accusing, those of being accused, but don't sweep it under the rug. So forced arbitration is unfair because it creates an uneven playing field. In sexual harassment and sexual assault situations in the business environment, most people sign a document not realizing what they're signing. It's one thing to buy a car or whatever else and there's an arbitration clause hidden in the middle of it. It's another thing to sign away your ability to talk about how your dignity was violated. And you'll never get society where it needs to be until you have a system that's more transparent. Sunshine solves a lot of problems. And as a society, the more we know about the nature of the problem, the sooner we can fix it. I have no problem with arbitration as long as it's voluntary. I want to review the Federal Arbitration Act because I think it is uneven, quite frankly, not just in this area, but in many other areas. I spent a lot of time in the courtroom before I got here on both sides, defense and plaintiff, and I understand the protections of a courtroom, the challenges of being sued, but when it comes to sexual harassment and sexual assault, I think most Americans, if they really understood what we were trying to do, would be with us. And what are we trying to do? To go to work, you can't sign away your dignity. If something happened to you in the workplace that was inappropriate, these arbitration clauses bury it. And they muzzle the victim. You will never fix this problem until you fix that. Gretchen is a living example of somebody with courage, but also somebody who was muzzled because of the fine print. So here's what I think. I think Senator Durbin will bring this up, I hope, in committee and Judiciary Committee. I think it will get a lot of bipartisan support, Senator Gillibrand. And if Senator Schumer brings it to the floor, it will pass overwhelmingly. I'll end where I did a couple years ago, to the business community. Don't come to this dance reluctantly. Embrace this. To the Business Roundtable, to the Chamber of Commerce. You should be leading the way here because these arbitration clauses are unfair and they're not good for business. So Senator Gillibrand, if this happens, it'll be because of your leadership, your never take no for an answer attitude, which is good when you think you're right. Cheri, you've been a really good voice. And Gretchen, all these years later, I think you're going to see the fruits of your labor.
Thank you. All right.
Congresswoman Bustos.
All right. Thank you very much. And to both Senators Graham and Gillibrand, thank you for all of your hard work. Gretchen Carlson, thank you for everything that you've done to be such a champion on this. That was a very important message that was just delivered to the business community. I always say when we're putting together remarks, what's our call to action? I'm a former journalist myself, and I always like to know what's our call to action. That's the call to action. It's bad business to have these forced arbitration clauses. It is bad business, and it's bad for America. So thank you for that shout out. It's important that if you look at who's standing up here, we've got Democrats, Republicans, House, Senate. That's how you get things done. And I happen to know that senator you were referring to, Senator Durbin, from my home state of Illinois, and I know that he will do everything he can to make this right as well. Gretchen, I consider you a friend, a partner in this. I want you to take a look at this, right over here to my right, to your left. That is the language that was in Gretchen Carlson's contract. So you think about that. In order to continue her job, look at all relevant allegations and events shall be held in strict confidence. That's a problem. That is a problem. But even though there were attempts to silence Gretchen Carlson, you see her standing up here today. And it is because of her hard work, because of our friends on the Senate side, my lead co-sponsor on the House side, Morgan Griffith, who couldn't be here today from the state of Virginia. So again, we have Republicans and Democrats on the House side as well. But we've got way too many people who have been silenced for way too long. And let me tell you how I came to this. First of all, I've been a woman in the workplace for since I was, in my early 20s, going back to 1985. And I know a lot of women who have been on the receiving end of sexual harassment. And but what really shone a light on this for me was when I woke up one day, and as a former journalist, I still like to read newspapers, and read the Washington Post that did an do we have anybody from the Post here, by the way? Anybody from the Washington Post here? Okay, you're missing a really great shout out. But the hard work that they did to expose what had happened at Kay and Jared Jewelers. And this was back in, I think the story was 2016, 2017. And I'll tell you, I got to the end of that story and could not believe what was exposed. You had managers there that at the top, who literally, as condition of promoting women, those women were required to sleep with this guy. They would have mandatory conferences that women would have to attend, where they would have to go through groping and being harassed and demeaned. This was all exposed in that story. So that was for me when I said, that's it, we've got to do something about this. So we'd made a decision that we were going to introduce some legislation and write some legislation to help put a stop to this. So the women that had been silenced because of forced arbitration through Kay and Jared Jewelers, that going forth, that women would be in a position, or people who were sexually harassed or assaulted would have an opportunity to speak out and not be silenced and not have their day in court robbed from them. So I'm really, really proud to be the lead in the House on the Ending Forced Arbitration and Sexual Harassment Act. I think it's really important to note that while Gretchen Carlson has had the guts for 5 years now, if you didn't see the headlines last week, she just celebrated, I don't know if celebrated is the right word, Gretchen, I acknowledged 5-year mark of when this all started for her. And she'll tell you her own story. She's one person, but we have 60 million Americans who are living under these forced arbitration clauses. And if you think about it, I think Senator Graham did a really good job of explaining. If you think about it, I still remember back in, when I was fresh out of college, getting all excited. You go down to the HR department, you sign your paperwork, and then maybe a few years later you go on to another job and you go to HR and you sign on to your paperwork. You don't know that language that is taking away your rights is hidden in that. So that is what we are addressing through our act. To the point that was made by Senators Gillibrand and Graham, we're going to get this thing done. We're going to get this thing done. We have to get it done for the sake of the 60 million people who are living under this cone of silence, and that allows the harassors to continue to get away with this. So with that, I think the most important person standing up here today is Gretchen Carlson, because she has lived through this. She is, even though she's got some restrictions on what she can say, she's here to fight for this and has been fighting for the last 5 years to make sure that we get this done. Gretchen Carlson.
Well, thank you so much to the members of Congress standing beside me here today. It's so important to me that this is bipartisan and for the country. I am Gretchen Carlson. As Representative Bustos just said, this month marks 5 years since I jumped off the cliff by myself at Fox News, filing my harassment lawsuit and taking down Roger Ailes. A dear friend of mine said shortly after that time, Gretchen, something good is going to come from this. And at the time, I didn't really see that at all. But a lot of good has come from my decision to come forward and stand alongside millions of other women and men who are also being silenced. So 5 years in the rearview mirror, today I'm really bullish on getting this done. In 2019, I founded my nonprofit, Lift Our Voices, and it's dedicated to eradicating these silencing mechanisms, forced arbitration and NDAs. You know, I like to say, in other words, it's going to stop companies from hiding their dirty laundry. So we do this work for the millions of people who don't necessarily have the resources or the platform that I have to make this public. Since our launch, we've had success. Wells Fargo, Microsoft, thanks to Senator Graham, took forced arbitration clauses out of their contracts. Even my old employer, Fox News, was recently fined $1 million by the New York City Human Rights Commission and forbidden from forcing their employees into forced arbitration for sexual harassment and assault for 4 years. Who would have ever thought that would happen? Also, just this past month, Goldman Sachs agreed to reverse course, examine the effects of forced arbitration on their employees. It was only a few months back in April when Goldman's board of directors unanimously rejected a resolution that I was a part of and had put forth on this issue. Still, at the annual shareholders meeting, our proposal received 49% of the vote. You see, people are coming to understand this issue. And what happened? Goldman decided to reverse their stance and examine their use of forced arbitration. So I see this as being in the middle of a critical time, a critical window for our workers' rights, and it's time to implore to other members of Congress, as I like to say, please come with us and get on the right side of history. It's time to remove the silencing mechanisms. No one can be expected to do their best job at work when they have a muzzle on, in the presence of predators and people who are protecting them. So here we are again today, 3.5 years since our fight to get Congress to pass this the first time. These members of Congress standing with me, they realize that this issue doesn't discriminate between Republicans and Democrats. And my hope is that many more on both sides of the aisle will follow their lead. I know what it takes to be brave, so please follow in our footsteps. Marching in the streets can inspire, editorials can open minds, hashtags galvanize, but legislation is the only action that lasts. Laws give us the power to do what's just and right. So it's bigger than Cosby or Weinstein. It's bigger than Murdoch or Ailes. If we lift our voices together and we get Congress to get this done, we're going to make the workplace a lot safer for our generation, for my kids, for your kids, and future generations. Their eyes, they're watching us right now. Let's meet them at this moment. Let's make them proud.